That piano solo of Spirit of Life for so many years has been the signal that it is time to begin our service. Sit, it says, find a place here among us, settle in, listen. It is a signal and a siren beckoning a welcome, introduction, a sign to sing and sigh. It's our call to community. It's our call to celebration. Many, many years ago, I had this idea that I wanted to create a Sunday service called Theology of a Piano and feature the stories and reflections and talents of many of our group pianists. But I was never quite sure what I meant by theology of a piano, and though it would be an enjoyable service, I wasn't sure what it all meant. And then a few months ago, my colleague, Darcy Baxter, posted a wonderful homily about jazz pianist Keith Jarrett. And finally, Darcy said what was in my heart about what piano lessons have taught me above and beyond music. And so at long last, meaning and message and method and media have finally come together to create what I thought would be a fitting Mother's Day Sunday. You see, my mother is a piano teacher, not just a piano teacher, but in the ways of small towns where she lives, she is the piano teacher. It's not just her occupation, but her heart, her talent, her passion, and in large part, her identity. Alas, though she imparted free, lifelong piano lessons to me, she was unable to impart her natural talent and dedication to the instrument. Oh, I play at the piano, and though it brings me equal amounts of solace and frustration, I would not live without it. But I grew up surrounded by classical piano music. Chopin, Liszt, Beethoven, all formed the soundtrack of my childhood. All played on a 100-year-old Steinway grand piano, so revered by my mother that it had moved to the tropics with us and had to be hauled by a crane through a dismantled window in our very small upper story apartment where it took up most of the living room. I spent many hours lying on the wooden floors underneath that piano where I didn't just hear the music, but I could feel it resonate through my entire body. I absorbed the music. To this day, I don't just listen to music, I feel it in my bones. So, Mom, I dedicate this one to you. Thank you for giving me the gift of a lifetime love of music. Happy Mother's Day. I'm so very grateful today for our Minister Emeritus, Boyd McDonald, and to Carolyn Arneson, Tom Nagy, Curtis Dueck, Becky Verdun, and Rosemary Harris for sharing their talent with us to give us a glimpse of the language, lessons, theology, and psychology in a little tour of what a piano can do and be to each of us. And I'm grateful to my colleague, the Reverend Darcy Baxter, for sharing her short homily, which brings all of this into focus and brings it all together for us today. And so we begin. Lee Hughes said, A person should stir self with poetry, stand firm in ritual, complete self in music.
So, driving in the Highlands can be a challenge. First of all, you have to learn to drive on the left. That's on the main roads. But in the country, you may encounter single lanes. And the challenge is who pulls over when you meet another car. And if you encounter sheep, you just have to wait until they move on. So Carolyn and I rented a car in Edinburgh in 1979. It was following a few concerts that my two-piano colleague and I played in Amsterdam and London. And we wanted to play some pieces by Thea Musgrave today. She is a Scottish composer. She studied in Paris with Nadia Boulanger and now lives in Vermont with her husband, who is an opera conductor. She's composed over a dozen operas. The most famous one is Mary, Queen of Scots. So these pieces are called driving in the Highlands, and Carolyn will explain each of the 5 that we plan to do.
So the first piece is the road hog. Learner driver. Drunken driver. And the Sunday driver. And finally, the backseat driver.
Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. When I was young, my parents made me take piano lessons, and I hated it. I didn't like being told what notes I had to play and in what order to play them and when each one was supposed to be played. But really what I hated the most was having to practice every single day. So one day, I took the family's cassette recorder and recorded myself practicing. Then the next day, when my mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner, expecting to hear the sounds of me practicing, well, that's exactly what she heard, because I had pressed play on the cassette recorder, playing back the previous day's practicing. And I just sort of sat back and thought, wow, this is the life. But the anxiety in me grew and grew. I couldn't take the subterfuge. So I had to let go of this ruse and go back to practicing just for my nerves. It wasn't long after that that I ended up quitting taking piano lessons altogether. That was in my teens. And it wasn't for another decade until I picked up playing the piano and the bass and other instruments once I had overcome my distaste for learning music. And with that as an introduction, I would like to present the very first composition, a duet, from Sebastian and me, entitled Opus Number 1. Enjoy. I think that's it.
Hello. I like playing the piano because I'm not very good at it. It's like infinity just sitting in front of you. And for me, the bottleneck is right here. Like it just doesn't know what to do with these hands to make it sound like the music that I can otherwise hear and in some contexts produce. And so I really like having the long-term challenge of getting better at playing the piano. Very, very, very slowly, I'm making progress. Over the last couple of years, this is the kind of music that I've been playing.
Good morning. My name is Becky Verdun, and I have been attending GRU for about 8 years. The first few years were pretty sporadic, but more recently I have gradually become more and more involved. I have played piano for services in coffee houses, sung in the choir, helped with DRE, and recently I became the chair of the Social Action Committee. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my piano journey, starting with my older sister teaching me the basics when I was barely old enough to read, through a music degree at Laurier. I have been inspired by a series of caring and nurturing adults who took an interest and invested their time in developing my skills and confidence. Today I want to tell you about a few of them to honor their role in my life. My grandma played organ at Dundalk United Church every Sunday for 58 years, plus countless weddings, funerals, and piano lessons. My siblings and I used to take turns going early with her to church and sitting on the organ bench while she played the prelude, complete with church bells. She lived across the street from the church, and after candlelight Christmas Eve services, we would walk home with our candles lit and sit in the living room around the piano and sing Christmas carols by candlelight. This was my introduction to music as a magical and glorious experience, and I couldn't get enough. Mrs. Postma was my piano teacher for 13 years, and I owe my expressive style of playing to her. She was the most kind, encouraging, and supportive teacher, and was so committed to providing a rich learning experience for her students. I remember studio parties where everyone dressed up as animals and we watched a video animation of the beloved suite, Carnival of the Animals. Sometimes she brought us to play piano for seniors or organized duets between students. She took me to the music store and taught me how to choose piano scores, helped me navigate the world of competitions, festivals, and exams, and shared her love of expressive and emotionally evocative playing. As I grew older, she treated me like an equal, and we had many conversations about music and my hopes and dreams for the future. Mr. Hall was a Sunday school teacher at the church I grew up in. I don't remember how it started, but he found out that I played piano and asked me to play for the Sunday school opening exercises every week. He gave me a ride so I'd get there early, let me pick out the songs each week from his big book of kids' church songs, and I played piano to accompany everyone to sing along. I did this for all of grade 6, and I can't imagine I was all that good at the beginning, but he was nothing but encouraging and really made me feel like I was an important part of the Sunday school team. This led to many years of playing piano for a youth group and church services. Mrs. Harris was a church music extraordinaire. Every Christmas and Easter at the church I grew up in, they put on a big choral and orchestral dramatic production. One week, for reasons I cannot recall, quite possibly because I was bored, I decided to tag along to rehearsals with my mom, who sang in the choir. I asked the accompanist, Mrs. Harris, if I could sit with her and turn pages, and she agreed. Thus started a long relationship of page turning between me and Mrs. Harris. I turned pages at every choir rehearsal and production for years. I had no idea at the time, but I learned so much about accompanying choirs from watching her and her interactions with the choir director. It absolutely sparked a love for choir music and accompanying. Leslie Diath was my piano teacher at Laurier when I studied music. My inclination has always been for sight reading and learning music, rather than practicing, perfecting, and memorizing. I brought him new pieces to my lessons almost every week, sometimes because I'd found something I was excited about, sometimes because I just hadn't practiced enough on the old pieces and it was easier to bring something new. He was always encouraging and often suggested even more new music, lending me his books and recordings and telling me about composers I'd never heard of. With his support, I accompanied voice students in the women's choir, played in ensembles for student compositions, and developed a deep love for lesser-known music, Canadian music, and collaborative piano of all kinds. One year, Les was on sabbatical, so I studied with Heather Taves. I learned many things from her, including the importance of caring for my body and not injuring it while playing piano. She said something that has stuck with me ever since. "Becky, you have great grades, and I can tell you're smart. Are you thinking of doing a master's degree?" Because I'd been homeschooled throughout elementary and high school, I was really insecure about my academic abilities when I got to university. When an accomplished musician and academic validated my abilities, it was the first time I thought that maybe I fit in academia and could consider postgrad studies. Throughout all these years, my parents were my biggest supporters. They paid for years and years of piano lessons, music books, competitions, festivals, exams, and more. My mom drove me to every event and took me out for a Wendy's Frosty after every performance, whether I won a trophy or came in last place. My dad often recorded my recitals and always made time to hear me play. One of the reasons I decided to homeschool in high school was so that I would have time for practicing, and my parents always ensured that I had time and space to do so. I could probably go on for hours about all the church musicians, professors, choir directors, classmates, and colleagues who have inspired me, but I think you've gotten the gist of it. I wouldn't be the pianist or the person I am today without the dedication of these caring and nurturing people. In my social work studies, I learned about some of the research that supports this. A research organization called Child Trends reports that children who have a caring, mentor-like adult in their life are more engaged in school, involved in their communities, interested in learning new things, have better mental health, and are overall more likely to flourish. As I've become an adult myself, I often think about how I can be this kind of adult to the young people in my life. Who might I share a magical musical experience with? How might I have meaningful conversations about music and life with a young person? Where might I give a child an opportunity to play an important role in their community? Today I'm going to play an improvisation on the traditional hymn tune, Balm in Gilead, arranged by Joseph M. Martin. Thanks for watching and enjoy.
There has always been a piano in my home. When my parents returned from their honeymoon in the Gatineau, they stopped into Heinzman's in Toronto and bought a piano. It was apparently their first piece of furniture. When Colin and I moved in together, I think the newly purchased piano was the first piece of furniture to be moved into our apartment. My mother was a piano teacher, so music was always happening in my home. I had a bit of an on-off relationship with piano in my younger years, but when I discovered I could play Brahms and Debussy, things started to take off. I think these two composers exemplify what it is that I love about the piano. With Brahms, you can literally rock the walls and play the loudest, most dramatic fortissimos, or with Debussy, express the sounds of delicate, gossamer enchantment. I love this range and everything in between. I love being the whole orchestra, timpani and all, or being in a private moment of magic. It sometimes feels a little bit like flying or dancing. It feels very physical, and the sound, especially in the bass, just resonates right through me, and I love that feeling. Playing the piano has been important to me for creating beauty. I play for my own enjoyment, but also to share with others. And it always is my hope that if I get lost in the zone, that the listener has a chance of being carried away with me to the zone as well. Playing piano has also helped me express the unexpressible. I might be feeling a deep something that needs to be released. I would sit down and play and play and play, and in the end, that something usually had dissipated. I also feel really grateful to have an instrument that I love the sound of. Sometimes I just play notes and close my eyes and let the sound vibrations carry me away.
January 27th, 1975 was the most exciting day yet of 17-year-old Vera Brandeis's life. She stepped out onto the vast stage of the Cologne Opera House in Germany. The auditorium was empty, lit only by the emergency exit sign lights. But in a few hours, American pianist Keith Jarrett was going to play. She, the youngest concert promoter in Germany, had convinced the opera house to host a late-night concert, and it had sold out. In a few hours, 1,400 people would fill the auditorium to listen to Jarrett play a completely improvised, unrehearsed concert. When Jarrett and his producer arrived at the concert hall, they glanced at the piano and were noticeably quiet. They played some notes. They glanced at each other and then turned to 17-year-old Vera and said, quote, "If you don't get another piano, this concert is not going to happen tonight." The piano was literally unplayable. It was out of tune, and the black keys were sticking. The pedals did not work. The upper register of the keyboard was harsh and tinny because all the felt had been worn away. It was weak in the bass register, and the pedals did not work properly. And most importantly, it was too small, so it didn't even have enough volume to actually reach the back of the auditorium. So, of course, Jarrett refused to play. Apparently, there had been some confusion by the opera house staff. Jarrett had requested a Bosendorfer 290 Imperial Concert Grand piano. The opera house staff found another Bosendorfer piano backstage, a much smaller baby grand piano, and, assuming it was the one requested, placed it on stage. The staff did not realize that the piano they had found was a small piano intended for rehearsals and was in super poor condition. Brandeis tried everything to find a replacement. She even rounded up some friends to push a grand piano through the city streets, but it was raining hard, and the local piano tuner warned her that a piano would never survive such a trip. The piano tuner worked on fixing up the little piano that was on stage, but could not improve it a whole lot. Keith Jarrett left and went out to his car, leaving 17-year-old Vera to greet 1,400 soon-to-be furious concert-goers. Vera had no other choice but to beg Jarrett to perform. Through the window of the car, standing in the rain, Vera begged. Jarrett eventually took pity and said, "Never forget. Only for you." A few hours later, Jarrett walked out onto that vast opera house stage to the small, unplayable piano in front of a packed concert hall and began. Not what you were expecting, huh? Jarrett and his producer decided to record the concert so they had documentation of how much of a musical catastrophe it turned out to be. and they wanted to play it for future promoters and tell them to make sure to be thorough and ensure that there is always a proper piano. But instead, what they recorded was absolutely beautiful. Jarrett completely avoided the harsh upper registers and stuck to the middle of the keyboard, which offered the music a soothing feel. Since he had to compensate for how quiet the piano was, he used these rolling, repetitive riffs in the bass to try to get some resonance, and during the concert he stood up and pounded on the keys. At different parts of the recording, you can actually hear him moaning in frustration. All those adjustments Jarrett had to make to cope with that awful piano. And all those adjustments forced him into new realms of creativity. The Cold Concert album is the best-selling jazz album in history. The best solo jazz album in history and the best-selling piano album in history. We human beings are an incredibly creative and resilient bunch. There are so many instances when we are faced with an unplayable piano and we are actually able to produce something great out of it. But so often our first reaction is what Keith Jarrett's was. Heck no, I am not gonna work with that. I want to work with what I'm used to, with what I'm comfortable with. I want the grand concert piano, not the broken down tiny rehearsal piano. That's too messy, that's too broken, that looks too hard. And while not every piano player sitting down at a rundown piano is going to produce a best-selling album, this story of the Köln concert reminds us of a very important truth, particularly in this historical moment, that engaging with the limitations of our life can yield beautiful possibilities. Beauty can be born from brokenness. But we get so caught up in our habits. We, of course, rather avoid our limitations, rather avoid playing on a broken, rundown piano. A few years ago, there was a transit strike in London that shut down most of the underground train stations. Of course, right now, London is in another version of shutdown, as we all are. But there were buses and some above-ground trains that commuters could use. Now, most London commuters use public transit to get to work. Very few use cars. An economist got hold of the transit data during the strike and after. They identified people who took the same route to work every day, what they did during the strike, and what they did after the strike. Now, you would think that commuters, people who need to get to the same place every single day, who know exactly where to go, which track their regular train is on, where to stand on the train platform, what car to get in, you would think that these folks would have already found and been using the optimal route to get to work. The economists discovered that about 5% of people who changed their route during that strike decided to continue to use that new route after the transit strike was over. That 5% represented thousands and thousands and thousands of people. We get into particular habits. We get knocked off course. And often we may discover that our original habit was the best way to do things. But a significant number of us may discover that the new way of doing things may actually be better. Engaging with limitations can yield beautiful possibility. Beauty can be born from brokenness. Of course, we face all kinds of limitations. We have been facing unimaginable limitations. And in midst of this devastating surge, I find myself wondering, what kind of possibilities can be born by directly engaging our limitations? What kind of possibilities can be born by directly engaging our limitations? What beauty is waiting to be born? Blessed be, and Amen.
If these old walls could speak of things that they remembered well, stories and faces dearly held, a couple in love in week to week, rooms full of laughter. If these walls could speak, if these old halls, the hallowed halls could talk, they would have a tale to tell of sun going down and dinner bell, and children playing at hide and seek from floor to rafters. If these halls could speak, they would tell you that I'm sorry for being cold and blind and weak. They would tell you that it's only that I have a little bit of a stubborn streak. If these walls could speak. If these old-fashioned window panes were eyes, I guess they would have seen it all. Each little tear and sigh of footfall, every dream that we came to seek and followed after. If these walls could speak, they would tell you that I owe you more than I could ever pay. Here's someone who really loves you. Don't ever go away. That's what these walls would say.
And so on this Mother's Day, I leave you with this hope that we know that our piano lessons teach us so much more beyond music. If only we listen, if only we heed. In the words of Thelonious Monk, the piano ain't got no wrong notes. Let us carry the flame, friends, and let the people say, Amen. It didn't go out. There's a lesson in there somewhere.
Carry the flame of peace and love till we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Then we shall see a world of light and a world of joy. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again.
Let the people say